The marble floor gleamed under the lobby lights, so bright it almost hurt to look at. My hands were still warm from the coffee I'd bought for him, the cup trembling just enough to betray what I didn't yet understand. Then the guard's puzzled stare met mine, and in that still second, the world seemed to tilt, just slightly, before it shattered. If you've ever trusted someone so completely that you couldn't see the cracks forming beneath your feet, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because what happened next wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. I stood there, invisible in the place I thought I belonged, while my sister stepped out of the elevator wearing my name. The hum of air conditioning faded, and my pulse filled the silence. That was the moment everything started to unravel. The floor of the lobby gleamed beneath my shoes, so polished that I could see my own reflection trembling in it. I remember balancing a coffee tray in one hand and the small wrapped box in the other. The kind of gift you buy when you still believe surprises mean something. I had left work early, heart light, imagining his smile when he saw me. But the moment I stepped toward the reception desk, everything cracked. The guard's eyes shifted, uncertain. His voice was firm but polite, asking me who I was, why I was there. I laughed at first, thinking it was some mix-up, but then he said her name, Mrs. Bennett, already upstairs, already signed in. My stomach dropped so fast I could barely breathe. My sister's name echoed from his mouth, paired with my husband's title, as if the world had rearranged itself without warning me. The coffee cup slipped slightly, and I caught it before it fell. The lid bent under my grip. People stared, and yet everything sounded distant, muffled, like someone had wrapped the air in cotton. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just stood there, realizing that the life I thought was mine had been quietly replaced while I wasn't looking. That moment in the lobby, that cold, echoing space, was when it all ended. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of everything that would come next. Before everything shattered in that lobby, my life was quiet, almost painfully normal. The kind of calm that feels like safety when you're living it. Our house sat on a tree-lined street just outside Chicago. White shutters. A porch swing that creaked every time the wind came through. I used to joke that peace had a sound, and for me, it was that swing on Sunday afternoons. Michael had just been promoted, the kind of leap people spend their lives chasing. I remember how proud I was, how proud we were. I used to iron his shirts the night before meetings, leave notes in his briefcase. The small domestic rituals that made me feel like I was part of his success. I thought we were building something solid, a life that made sense. Emily came back into our lives around that time. My little sister, free-spirited, funny, always a little lost. She'd just ended a long relationship, and I told her to move in with us for a while. It felt good having her around. The laughter came back into the house, and for a while, I convinced myself that everything was perfect. But looking back, I see how the warmth had cracks. Michael started working later. He answered questions with half smiles that didn't reach his eyes. Emily and he talked more than they used to, about things I didn't understand. I brushed it off as connection, the kind I'd always hoped they'd have. It's strange how love dulls your instincts. You see the signs, but label them as something else. Exhaustion, stress, coincidence. I told myself stories that kept me comfortable. I believed that good people don't destroy what they have. If someone had told me then what was coming, I would have laughed, the way people do when they can't imagine the ground shifting beneath them. But the truth was already there, waiting quietly, just beyond my view. It started with something as simple as a birthday, Michael's. I remember how proud I felt walking through the mall, choosing the right wrapping paper, the smell of new leather from the wallet I'd picked out. Classic, understated, something he'd actually use. I wanted the surprise to mean something. I told myself it would remind him that no matter how busy he got, home was still here, waiting for him. Emily was the one who encouraged me to go to the city that morning. She said he'd love it, that a surprise was exactly what he needed. Her voice had this cheerful certainty that made me feel silly for even hesitating. I remember laughing with her over breakfast, coffee steaming between us, not realizing how rehearsed her comfort sounded. But that week, things felt different. Michael had been distant, his phone always lighting up at strange hours. His tone clipped when I called. He told me work was stressful, that the new investors were relentless. I believed him, or maybe I wanted to believe him. Every little excuse was easier than admitting the truth whispering underneath. The night before his birthday, I barely slept. I kept replaying our last conversation. How he'd said he might not make it home for dinner? Something inside me felt unsettled, but I smothered it with optimism. I packed his gift carefully, tucked the receipt into my purse, and told myself this was what good wives did. They showed up, driving into downtown Chicago that morning. The sun hit the windshield just right. The city looked golden, alive, full of promise. I remember feeling proud of our life, proud of the surprise, proud of being the kind of woman who still believed in gestures that meant something. But love has a cruel way of fogging the glass. You think you're seeing clearly, but all along, the reflection staring back at you is already cracked. The elevator doors opened to the kind of lobby that always smelled faintly of money. Cool marble, sharp cologne, and polished brass that caught the light like it was proud of itself. I held the coffee tray steady in one hand, the small gift bag swinging lightly from the other. My heart was warm with anticipation. I'd pictured his surprised smile all morning, imagined how the barista's handwriting on the cup, "Happy birthday, Michael," would make him laugh. The first sign that something was wrong came from the security guard's hesitation. His eyes flicked over me, then to the monitor, then back. He smiled, polite but uneasy. For a second, I thought he was joking. Then came that laugh. Low, uncomfortable, the kind people use when they wish they didn't have to be the ones delivering bad news. He said a name that didn't make sense. My name. He said she was already inside, for a heartbeat. I didn't move. I felt the world tilt slightly, like gravity had shifted by just enough to make me lose balance. My mouth went dry. I started to ask, or maybe I didn't. My memory fractures there, blurred around the edges by disbelief. Then I saw her, Emily, my sister, standing just past the glass doors with her hand lightly resting on Michael's arm. Both of them smiling at something I couldn't hear. The receptionist leaned forward as if to greet them. Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, my own name, rolling easily off someone else's lips. The air left my lungs in a way that didn't feel human. The sound of my heartbeat filled my ears, loud enough to drown out the rest. The marble floor reflected them perfectly. Her dress, his tailored suit, the careful choreography of a life that looked eerily familiar. Mine. couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. It was as if my body understood before my mind did, locking me in place until the truth finished crawling its way to the surface. The truth that they had taken everything, not just the marriage, but the identity, the story, the name. When Michael's gaze lifted, it brushed right past me, whether he didn't see me or pretended not to. I still don't know. My sister's laughter cut through the air, bright and hollow. I remember staring at her hand, manicured, shaking slightly, and wondering how long it had been that way. I turned before anyone else could notice. My reflection followed me in the glass, pale and foreign. I walked out into the morning light, each step heavier but clearer than the last. The coffee was still warm in my hand, though I couldn't taste a thing. Somewhere between the lobby doors and the street, the tears burned away into something colder. Not strength yet, but the beginning of it. The sharp edge of survival pressing through the cracks of everything I'd lost. The drive home felt endless. I don't remember the streets or the lights, only the hum of the tires against the asphalt and the way my hands trembled on the wheel. It was as if sound itself had thinned. No music, no city noise, just the faint roar of my own heartbeat. Every red light stretched into eternity. Every green one felt like a test I wasn't sure I could pass. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I couldn't even tell if I'd been crying or just hollowed out. The house looked the same. Too much the same. His jacket was still on the hook by the door. A coffee mug sat in the sink. Rim stained faintly with lipstick, I now realized wasn't mine. The framed photos on the mantel stared back like strangers caught in someone else's story. I stood there, frozen, wondering how many of these moments had already been lies. I sank onto the couch, the air too still, the silence too heavy. My mind replayed it all. Emily's laughter, Michael's excuses, the soft reassurances I used to cling to. Each memory came back twisted, warped by truth. I saw her tears the night she said she felt alone. I remembered telling her she could always count on us. I laughed then, an ugly, broken laugh, because somehow she had. The grief came next, not loud, not cinematic, just a deep ache that sat behind my ribs and refused to leave. Anger tried to surface, but it fizzled into exhaustion. I stared at the ceiling and wondered how long they had been planning my erasure. How many times I had stood in the same room with both of them, blind and smiling. But somewhere between that laugh and the silence that followed, something shifted. I realized no one was coming to explain. No one was going to fix this or make it make sense. The only way out was through. I stood, wiped my face, and picked up the mug from the sink. The lipstick mark caught the light again, bold, taunting, and I felt the first flicker of something new. Not forgiveness, not yet, but clarity. The illusion was gone, and in its place, the beginning of resolve. Tomorrow, I would start finding out just how deep the betrayal really went. The law office was too quiet. The kind of quiet that amplifies every pen click, every breath. Caroline Marks, my attorney, had one of those calm, deliberate voices that made you feel like she'd seen every kind of disaster before. I remember staring at her desk, the neat stacks of folders, the sterile light bouncing off the glass table, as she began explaining the financial disclosures for the divorce. I thought I knew what pain was. I was wrong. The first shock was the missing account. Our joint savings. Gone. Then the credit cards I hadn't opened. The loans in my name. The business accounts linked to shell companies that shouldn't exist. She said words like forgery and embezzlement, but my brain filtered them into something simpler. He stole from me. Not just money. Years. Security. My name. I spent the next few days chasing answers. Bank records. Old emails. Contracts I'd signed without reading because I trusted him. The picture that formed was grotesque. Michael Bennett, the man everyone thought was a respected CEO, didn't even legally exist under that title. The company was a front, the investors imaginary, the success story a script. Every dinner we'd toasted to, every promotion I'd bragged about, all of it fabricated. Then came the cruelest twist. Emily showed up, looking thinner, broken in a way that mirrored my own reflection. She wasn't gloating or defensive, just hollow. She had believed him too. The settlement money from her previous job, the investment he promised to help her manage, had vanished into the same abyss as my savings. For a long moment, I couldn't even speak. Anger wanted to rise, but it got tangled in pity. We had both been played by the same man, used as props in his performance. That realization didn't erase the betrayal between us, but it reframed it. In the cold light of that afternoon, surrounded by the evidence of everything he'd stolen, something inside me hardened into focus. The shock was gone. The grief was quiet now, replaced by a sharper emotion, resolve. I gathered the papers, stood, and met my own gaze in the reflection of the glass door as I left. He had built an empire of lies, but I would be the one to dismantle it. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of me reclaiming it. The morning light came in soft through the blinds, landing across the empty side of the bed. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up with tears in my throat. The quiet felt different, not hollow, not aching, just still. I sat up, let my feet touch the floor, and realized I hadn't thought about him first. That was the moment everything shifted. I made coffee, not for anyone else this time, just for me. The scent filled the kitchen that used to feel haunted, and I let it linger. The mug in my hands wasn't a reminder anymore. It was a small act of ownership. My life, my space, my name. That morning, I called Caroline again. The tone of my voice surprised me. Calm, deliberate. We went through the steps together, freezing what was left of the accounts, filing claims, preparing for the case. Each action felt like stitching torn fabric back together. Not perfectly, but enough to hold. I met with investigators, turned over every document, every lie he'd hidden in plain sight. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was restoring truth. Days turned into a rhythm, appointments, quiet dinners, long walks where my thoughts stopped hurting and started building. I began consulting again, the same work I'd once abandoned for his dream. The first paycheck wasn't much, but it felt like a medal, proof that I could stand on my own. A few weeks later, I walked back into that downtown lobby. The marble still gleamed, the air still smelled expensive, but the weight it once carried was gone. I stood near the security desk where everything had fallen apart and felt nothing but clarity. The past no longer owned me. It had burned itself out. Emily and I met once more. No tears this time, just quiet understanding. We didn't rebuild the closeness we'd lost, but we didn't need to. Forgiveness wasn't a door I had to walk through. It was a light I could turn on when I was ready. Standing there, I realized pain doesn't end cleanly. It transforms. It becomes muscle, memory, direction. What mattered now wasn't what they took, but what I chose to rebuild. By the time I locked my front door that night, I felt it. The subtle peace of reclaiming myself. The woman I used to be was gone. The one standing in her place was unshakable. Tomorrow, I would face him in court. But tonight, I was already free. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and old coffee, the kind of sterile air that seems to press down on every sound. I arrived early, not out of fear, but to feel the quiet before it began. The marble floor echoed beneath my heels as I walked past rows of benches, each one holding pieces of other people's endings. For a moment, I thought about the first time I'd stood in a place like this, years ago, signing marriage papers. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Then, I had been full of hope. Now, I was full of truth. He sat across the room when I entered, the same man, but smaller somehow. The polished confidence was gone, replaced by the gray film of someone who'd run out of lies. He didn't look at me right away. I didn't need him to. The power he once held had evaporated long before this morning. The lawyers spoke. Papers exchanged hands. Legal terms floated through the room like distant thunder. He tried to explain, to gesture toward remorse, maybe even rewrite the story in his favor. I listened without reacting. My silence did what my anger never could. It exposed him. Every time he looked for the woman who used to cry or plead, he found someone unshakable instead. I realized then that justice wasn't about what he would lose, but what I had regained. My peace, my voice, my self-respect. Watching him fumble through justifications felt like seeing a ghost try to reclaim life. There was no satisfaction in it, only closure. When the agreement was signed, the final document sealed, I felt no surge of triumph, just the steady calm of completion. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. The chapter was over. As I stood to leave, I looked at him one last time, not with hatred, not even pity, just acknowledgement. He was a lesson now, nothing more. The air outside felt lighter when I stepped into it, sunlight spilling across the courthouse steps. For the first time, I didn't look back. Justice had been served, but not by the court. It had been written in the way I carried myself, in the quiet strength that no one could take again. And as I walked away, I knew the next part of my story wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. The rebuilding, the rebirth, the peace that comes after surviving the fire. It's been 8 months since the courtroom, and the mornings feel new again. I moved into a smaller house by the lake. Quiet, simple, filled with sunlight. Every morning I open the windows and breathe in the scent of the water. There's no echo of his voice here, no shadow of what was. Just me and the sound of my own beginning. I started working again, consulting, part-time at first, then full days. It's not about rebuilding a career. It's about remembering that I am capable, resourceful, and enough. My clients trust me. I trust myself. That alone feels like a kind of miracle. Some days, I still catch myself thinking of the past, but it doesn't sting anymore. It's more like reading an old journal, distant, honest, but no longer alive. Pain left its fingerprints. Yes, but it also carved space for something stronger. I learned that heartbreak doesn't destroy you. It refines you. One morning last week, I drove back to the city and walked through the park near where everything fell apart. The skyline looked the same, but I wasn't the same woman who once stood trembling there. The world hadn't changed. I had. There's a quiet power in realizing you survived something meant to break you. I'm not angry at Emily anymore. I'm not even angry at him. They'll carry their own lessons. I've carried mine long enough. What I hold now is gratitude for the strength I didn't know I had, for the people who stood by me, and for the woman who refused to disappear. Some endings are really just rebirths wearing the mask of loss. When you've been broken open, you see life differently, sharper, truer. You learn to choose peace over pain, truth over illusion, and yourself over anyone who asks you to shrink. So, if you're listening to this and you're standing where I once stood, in the rubble of something you thought was real, remember this: you will not stay broken. You will rebuild. You will breathe again. Tell me your story. Have you ever had to rebuild after betrayal or loss? I read every comment, and your words matter here. Because when we speak our pain aloud, it loses power. And what grows in its place is something unshakable. Something like freedom.